Welcome back, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever. And welcome back to the IPI Global Network's Virtual World Congress, where we are reimagining journalism with 2020 vision. And actually, we've been doing this every Tuesday and Thursday since September 15. And we've been doing that with really some of the brightest thinkers and doers in this space, and we've been taking deep dives into some of the most wicked challenges for journalism. Everything from disinformation to working with the platforms to doing journalism under authoritarian governments to covering politics, and particularly the biggest election on right now, the US election. And as you would expect from the IPI Global Network, these have been truly global conversations, bringing extraordinary perspectives from around the world, lots of insights, and potentially lots of solutions. So we'll be putting a lot of the sessions online over the next few weeks, and we have also been covering some of the sessions in our newsroom. So you can check that out on the IPI website. And that brings us to today. We've got a special one-on-one conversation looking at how journalists are transitioning their careers outside of traditional newsrooms. And what does that mean for journalism? What are the opportunities for journalists? And, well, where are these two headed? And I'm delighted to introduce Violet Gonda, coming to us from London, and Barkha Dutt from New Delhi. And I'm going to hand straight over to Barkha to start the conversation because we're going to learn all about both of them. Over to you, Barkha and Gonda. Violet, sorry. No.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure talking to all of you here today, and I'm really looking forward to all of your questions and for this to be as interactive as possible. Now we're here to talk a little bit about what happens when journalists in an environment that in many of our countries is increasingly polarized politically, is increasingly corporatized, where in traditional newsrooms it is no longer possible to practice the journalism that we once believed in. What happens when you migrate out of this newsroom? What actually happens when you try and make it on your own? I think both of us on this panel today have very similar stories to that extent in terms of being people who migrated from what was once known as mainstream into being entrepreneurial journalists. That is, I think, a new nomenclature that I would give, where journalism remains our core love, but we have to find a way to make it financially sustainable. So let me start. I'll tell you a little bit about myself as well, but I want to first have our audience get to know Violet a little better. So Violet, why don't we start by asking you how it was that you came to leave your country and to practice your journalism from London, but still reporting on your country.
Thank you very much, Barkha. And first of all, I'd like to say thank you to Jackie and the International Press Institute for this opportunity to be able to share our work. And I'm really honored to be sharing this important platform with Barkha, who has a very interesting backstory. And as you will find out, it appears that even though we come from different countries and cultures, there are similarities in our journeys. Now, just a little bit of background so that you can understand where I've been coming from. Just a brief about Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe has never wanted an open media space. That is why to date, it virtually still has only one main television channel, all state controlled. Yet the country was the first to introduce television in the Southern African region in 1960. Neighboring South Africa, which only got a television station many years after Zimbabwe, boasts of many private sector television, radio, and print media stations today. And all neighboring countries in the region have, to some extent, liberated media spaces, while Zimbabwe has remained tight-fisted in this area. So our brief today is on how we have built careers outside traditional newsrooms and how we have made this transition. I feel that my work over the years has been determined by the situation in my country and have had to create my own platforms to tell the important stories. I've worked in broadcasting for over 20 years, focusing on human rights, democracy, and governance issues. And in 2001, I became one of 6 co-workers of SW Radio Africa, which made bold moves to provide alternative coverage of Zimbabwe from London. Shortly after the launch, we were all banned from returning home by President Robert Mugabe's regime, punishment for setting up the country's first independent radio station, which broadcast on shortwave for 14 years. Nevertheless, over the years, I've tried to find ways to go around state censorship and intimidation to bring alternative news coverage to Zimbabweans via modern external communications from 3 different locations or 3 different continents in the United Kingdom, America, and South Africa. And as you all know, radio plays an important role in social justice struggles, especially in the global South, where other mass media are not readily available. So I've had this unique experience of working for external so-called pirate broadcasting stations like Voice of America, Studio 7 in Washington, DC. And I was among a small group of people who launched and ran First TV Zimbabwe from South Africa. This was a cheeky and successful short-term free-to-air television station whose mission was to bring accurate news and information to Zimbabweans in the 2013 election period. Now, prior to leaving Zimbabwe 20 years ago, I worked in the TV documentary industry at Edwina Spicer Productions, which produced investigative documentaries, which were also banned. However, the 2 women production team found alternative ways of showing our documentaries. We joined forces with civil society organizations who had set up civic education programs and were able to conduct screening roadshows throughout the country, showing the political documentaries over using overhead projectors. We actually reached audiences that the national broadcaster, the ZBC, couldn't reach in rural communities. Now, fast forward to today, I was finally able to return to Zimbabwe following the fall of President Robert Mugabe in a coup in 2017. As a freelance journalist, I was immediately drawn into covering the most important election campaign since Zimbabwe's independence 40 years ago. I returned to investigate the legacy of Mugabe's rule, the lasting damage he has inflicted on the country, and whether the future holds the promise of real change. But I underestimated the reception I would receive, especially from the state, as my work for the last 2 decades was via satellite radio or TV and social media platforms. The situation this time was different because I was no longer broadcasting from my safe haven in the UK or in America or in South Africa, but in the trenches in Zimbabwe with very little protection. Throughout my year-long stay in Zimbabwe, armed with just my cell phone as a recorder, I used Twitter and Facebook to cover the country's elections. And unfortunately, I could not get any one-on-one interviews with the political leaders. The only place I could access the president or senior government officials or members of the security forces was actually at press conferences. So I soon became an irritant because of the challenging questions which exposed the system. The authorities were not used to this one way of isolating me was to portray me as a reckless, a rebellious journalist. And soon I became part of the news instead of me being the one actually covering the news. The system does not know the role of journalists, that the fourth estate is there to challenge, criticize, and keep the powers in check. If you ask critical questions, you are punished for it. And then I soon realized that my kind of journalism, which is practiced everywhere else in the world, has no place in this closed environment, and soon found myself being briefly detained at the State House, denied a passport from within Zimbabwe, something that I had been fighting for 18 years from exile, and threatened with deportation from my own country. I entered Zimbabwe as a foreigner, and the entire year I was there in 2018, I had to go and get my tourism visa renewed after every 3 months, even though I was born and raised in Zimbabwe. And as I said earlier, most of my adult life has been spent trying to find my voice in a competitive, authoritarian political environment. And as a freelance journalist, it was difficult to navigate my way in this terrain. But what I did manage to do, I went around this by partnering with human rights organizations such as the Zimbabwe Human Rights NGO Forum, who I collaborated with together with a few other freelance journalists to produce an investigative documentary exposing the August 1st, 2018 killings of unarmed civilians by the army following demonstrations over disputed elections. I also partnered with the leading Zimbabwe Election Support Network so I could conduct sort of like town hall type of public presidential and parliamentary election debates with candidates across the political divide. But of course, I was directly targeted by state-sponsored online trolls who accused me of spreading with negative
Yeah.
stories and the so-called new dispensation, so on and on and on. But I'm sure we can continue more when we discuss further. But tell me a bit about yourself also, Barker.
So I was just looking at some of the comments that are coming in, and we have from Ginkgo Koba in Japan saying that your case and what you described sounds very familiar in other countries, including Japan. I would say it's almost universal, and it's more so universal if you're a woman. If you're a woman and you're opinionated, you're stubborn, and you're independent, the chances are that you're going to offend just so many more people than men. And one of the easiest ways to discredit women is to call us reckless, is to label us, is to call us names, is to troll us. So all of this, I think, crosses geographies. My story is that I run an independent digital platform, video-driven, called The Mojo Story. You can look it up on YouTube. I started doing this about 7 to 8 months ago. Before that, I created a feminist content property called We the Women. Till 3 years ago, I was very much in the mainstream television of India, a primetime host and a journalist for over 2 decades. And then a quarrel over censorship with my previous organization, when 2 of my stories were editorially censored, led to us not being able to work together anymore. I also found at the same time the television landscape entirely changing. There was a kind of tabloidization of television, and then a partisanship, and then very little ground reporting. So most of it was this loud studio-driven debates, and often editorially compromised, and almost nothing of the ground reporting, the kind of television which, if I had been a college graduate today, I would have simply not wanted to be a television journalist, even after having been one for more than 2 decades. So that is how I came to being a journalist entrepreneur. And what I do, because reporting is my first love, is in a small team of 8 people. We basically try and go to where the story is in as many places as we can. Our motto is to go to where the story is. And we implemented this very literally during the COVID pandemic. We were the only major journalists who traveled the length and breadth of India at a time when big media chose to keep its stars hunkered down inside studios or inside their homes. We got into my little car and we covered 24,000 kilometers from the uppermost reaches to the southernmost tip of India, going into crowded tenements, going into COVID hospitals, and bringing you ground reportage and reminding people that this is what we became a journalist for, to give a voice to the voiceless and to stand up and be counted when things get tough, and to be outside of our comfort zones physically, emotionally, and intellectually. I've had to deal with a lot of the kind of things, Violet, that you're describing, the name calling, the ideological slotting, the lack of access, which is sometimes shut down, sort of blocking access is a very common way to punish and shut down voices. But I think technology has made a lot of things possible, and maybe I'll ask you to talk a little bit about that. Because, for example, today we're able to have this cross-global conversation. Similarly, now armed with a smartphone, good audio, a camera, a broadcast camera as a backup, I was able to do 4 months of COVID reportage and have most recently covered a brutal murder and alleged gang rape that has taken place of a Dalit woman in a village in Uttar Pradesh, India's most populous state. So I do believe that technology has broken down barriers for us. And I would be curious for you to talk a little bit about how that has enabled you, Violet.
Yeah, definitely. I believe I've managed to stay alive in terms of doing my work because of accessing all these digital platforms, because that's the only way I can reach Zimbabweans. And in a way, we are in the era of social media journalism, where citizen journalists have taken the social media by storm in this very highly politicized news landscape. And like in my country, extraordinary levels of formal unemployment, in particular youth unemployment, are compounded by the pressures of everyday life. Therefore, you find that a lot of these youths spend a lot of time on Twitter, on Facebook, and really, talking about the situation in the country. There's the negative aspect, though, to this. There's a lot of informal media because of this economic crisis, and many of it is unverified and unchecked. And so we get these problems with fake news and misinformation. And then on the other hand, we have some very active Twitterers who are far more effective than the mainstream media, which have resulted in the government in my country, for example, proposing amendments to legislation to control the social media landscape, which then threatens to clamp down our voices. Or voices of dissent and criticism. And only recently, I don't know if you were following the news in Zimbabwe, an investigative journalist, Hopo Chingono, spent more than 40 days in jail because he used Twitter to expose corruption. So those are the challenges that we face. Like you mentioned, we even when we are independent journalists and we're using these digital platforms, we still have problems to do with lack of financial assistance to get the information that we can actually trust. So more and more people are dealing with rumors, apart from all the built-in hazards of our trade. And the financial situation for most journalists that I saw in my country, most freelance journalists, is absolutely terrible. And this gives, the ruling party an enormous control. You need basic things like data on your phone to really do proper research and chase stories. So without these resources, you can't really do a proper job.
Right. Right. So that sounds familiar again. We have Alexander from Serbia joining in, and this technology is an example of what I was saying. It's enabling, but at the same time, Violet, you're absolutely right that it's a double-edged sword. But I think the important point you made is about individual entrepreneurs, independent journalists being sustainable. Now, I would put some of this responsibility on our audiences and to everybody who's tuned in, who's in a position to support independent journalism and good work. Everywhere I go in India, people complain non-stop about the state of media. So for example, when the COVID pandemic, I already mentioned that I traveled across India, but one of the most startling things I discovered is that you can be small and hugely impactful. So the humanitarian crisis that I reported on in India was that when the lockdown was announced here to deal with the pandemic, that's 1.3 billion people in lockdown, we saw India's poorest citizens, migrant workers who live in the villages and come to the city to work, about 45 million people out on the roads, fleeing the cities on foot in the heat with no food, no money, their little children walking beside them. And the mainstream media almost ignored that story for the first month, whereas me and a handful of other independent journalists walked with them in dense forests, under a blazing sun, through rain, and brought those stories home till the Indian Supreme Court was forced to take cognizance. So with a small team, we can make a big impact, but that does not mean that we do not need to be supported. And when the audience complains non-stop about the state of media, I always say that it's very easy to classify television as being ratings hungry, but ratings is not an abstract concept. Ratings is you and me. Ratings is all of you who switch on to one piece of content, privileging it over another piece of content. So you have to be ready to pay for the news or the content that you believe in. There is no way for people like us to sustain if you do not support us. And so, for example, on my channel now, I have a enabling button for viewer contributions. No one is blocked off from content if they don't pay. But we say that if you believe in this journalism, please contribute with what you think is an appropriate amount. And I'm glad to report that people are responding, but it needs to be much more structured so that voices like us can actually not just survive, but thrive. And how's that going for you, Violet?
You actually, I was going to say you're actually very fortunate that you are supported in this way, by
Yeah.
just the ordinary people, the citizens.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in my country, because of the economic crisis, I can't really expect a lot of people being able to do that, because even just having basic stuff like even painkillers, buying painkillers to go and die at home, or people don't have the money for that. Not a lot of people have the money to do this. So I would love to get donations for my work, but it's very difficult to ask just individual ordinary Zimbabweans who are struggling to do that. But that's a very good idea. Before I continue, I think I see a hand up from Sweeta Singh. Are we able to get her to say something, or she can
Yeah,
write?
I can actually see the question. The question is, how did mainstream media cover the migrants in the wake of the lockdown in India? Please share instances. I'll answer that briefly, Violet. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but since we had a question, Shweta, the mainstream media, at least television, not newspapers, city reporters still did their jobs, but you had the biggest mass exodus of human beings taking place in India since the partition of this country. Like I said, millions of people on foot on the road. And television channels did not cover this story, or if they covered it, they did it from inside their homes and inside their studio. I have no idea whether this was out of laziness, out of fear, out of not wanting to spend money, but small teams like myself, local reporters, stringers, digital journalists, this was essentially a story covered by very few people, and it was covered essentially by small digital companies, small independent journalists, and I think it would count as one of the biggest failings and failures of big television media. Sorry, Violet, it's back
No,
to you.
that's okay. And what about on the issue of polarization? How do you tackle that in your country? Because, like in my country, I am finding it really difficult to navigate around this issue, because polarization has also meant that those even in the opposition and so-called pro-democracy movement have become intolerant of
Oh,
opposing.
yeah. That is such an interesting question because, I always say that it's quite easy to choose a side, and because that means at least one camp or the other will protect you. But when you refuse, when you call yourself a free thinker, I certainly resist labels. I think of myself as a free thinker. Now, that does not mean that I don't have a point of view on a story. There might be certain issues on which there is no other side. There might be certain issues where the voiceless need a voice, and I will do a kind of advocacy journalism. But in most other cases, the truth is a multi-layered thing for us to uncover, and we have to do it peel by peel, layer by layer. And in the process of doing that, you often manage to basically offend people on the right of the spectrum, people on the left of the spectrum, the ruling party, the opposition party, and you kind of reach a point where sometimes nobody's talking to you, right? Nobody's talking to you, and you're getting abused from both sides with equal ferocity. And I always say that journalists chase too much popularity. I think journalists must be comfortable with being unpopular.
As I said, I think we, as I said right at the beginning, we have so many similarities. That those are the challenges that
Yeah.
even during this period when I was in Zimbabwe covering the elections, I could not get access or even interviews with the politicians from the ruling party, and I couldn't also get interviews with
Yeah.
politicians from the opposition, from the leading opposition.
Sounds familiar.
It doesn't.
Sounds familiar.
And the only time, as I said earlier, I could actually get access to any of them was at press conferences, where then I would just go out and ask the questions that I needed to ask for my stories.
Yeah.
Um,
What has been the toughest thing for you, Violet? Like going forward, what do you think is going to be most tough? Is it going to be resources? Is it going to be editorial freedom? Is it going to be a combination of the two?
it's all of the above. You know, I think my biggest challenge is that, you know, although I'm a journalist, I'm also a Zimbabwean first. So unfortunately, everything that I've had to do in my work has always been around this country that I love so much and passionate about in terms of reporting. So my life is based around what's happening in Zimbabwe, and my work is based around that. So it has its personal and professional challenges. You know, as I said, the last few years I've spent negotiating, you know, the democratic space in a competitive authoritarian political environment using the digital media. It comes with these challenges, the personal toll, the lack of solidarity, the feeling that you're reporting into thin air, the psychological trauma, even though you are not reporting from a war zone. It's not easy covering as traumatized society. The revenue that you are talking about, you know, the resource challenges that comes with being a freelance or an independent journalist, you know, and knowing your worth and um, and knowing how to use this to negotiate contracts. You know, coming from having spent 20 years in the West, and then trying to negotiate, like even just covering a story or moderating a Zoom meeting using the same rates that I use here, you know, in the global north, totally different things. So one has to know their worth about these things, and then also how to pace your work and your time, and not to eat, dream, and breathe the story. And unfortunately, in my case, this is Zimbabwe, this is my life. I have to figure out a way of dealing with that. But I've learned a lot from my experiences. And one of those lessons is not to do too much or be everything to everyone.
I think that's well said. And we have another question from Pooja, who says, I'm from Khabar Leheria, one of the digital outfits Barkha mentioned, who did not pause our ground reporting. Khabar Leheria, for our audience who does not know, is a fantastic, initiative, which basically empowered women in rural India to tell their own stories, right? So instead of people like us parachuting down and telling the story of women, these are women, you're giving women not just a voice, but you're giving them a camera or a notepad or a pen, and they tell their own stories. But she says that she doesn't really agree with my optimism about audience support, and she doesn't think that's viable. And I, Pooja, actually agree that it's not. I'm not saying that that is the way to sustain an operation. I think we have to move to a point where A, advertising has to move from television to digital. B, we have to have a subscription model, maybe different bands. 3, we have to look for grantees. 4, we have to supplement all of this with audience. I don't see a 5th model. Many people across the world are doing non-journalistic initiatives to supplement their journalism. I, for example, never used to charge for speaking engagements or moderations, but I now do ask for a professional fee because I funnel that into, the journalism I want to do. So there are many things that I think people have to appreciate, that it's not easy. It's very easy to sit, be an armchair critic of the state of media in your country. But if you as the audience are not willing to do anything about it, then you are part of the problem. I'm not absolving the rest of the media for flunking some of the most critical professional tests, but I think the audience has to take its share of responsibility about it. What do you feel about that?
Definitely, and exactly what you're talking about. Charging professional fees for doing some of this work, and this is exactly what I've been doing this lockdown period from March right up until now. I was working nonstop, partnering with various NGOs in my country, moderating the town hall debates I was doing on the ground in Zimbabwe. Now I'm doing them virtually, and to some extent, thanks to COVID, in some ways, it's been made easier for some of us to actually, move our work online. So there's been a lot of Zoom panel discussions. But again, as I said earlier on, trying to negotiate that contract with the people on the ground in Zimbabwe to say, this is what I charge, for my worth, and also the kind of work that I do and the skills. It's very difficult. In a lot of the cases, they actually expect you to just do it for free, because a lot of the journalists on the ground are doing it for free, or sometimes they only charge something like $50 for a 2 to 3 hour panel discussion, and they're doing the research, they're doing the questioning, and all these other things that come with the job, and it's not fair. You know, people have to understand that journalism is a profession. You know, we are
Yeah.
not doing this work just for the sake of it, even though we are also affected by what's going on in our own countries. Um, but in terms of the way forward for you, where do you see yourself heading?
Well, I still have, with all the difficulties, I still believe that my passion as a journalist will, in the end, prevail. And I believe that there may not be a mass audience for the kind of work I do, but there will be eventually a dedicated audience. I do, however, feel that I will have to subsidize my journalism with non-journalistic initiatives, whether it's producing video, whether it's doing corporate films, whether it's doing corporate events. I do not see any other way in this environment, in a shrinking economy. Impact is not enough. Winning awards and recognitions is not enough. We've got some of those for our COVID coverage and for other coverage that we've done on Mojo Story, but we need resources. And for resources, either we need foundations, philanthropists to come to step in and help us, or we need, in India, for example, there's actually quite a good idea. There's a fund that's been created by corporate leaders. They've all donated to a fund, and the fund run by a board tries to give some money to digital initiatives. So we need more business leaders with a conscience willing to do that. Violet, and I mean, I don't know, we have to just keep soldiering on. I think we have a few minutes left. There's one question, maybe you can take that. What role should taxation on large social networks and platforms play to subsidize local or regional media?
Oh, that's an interesting, very interesting question. But unfortunately, I think it's very difficult, especially to have that kind of system in some of our countries, because most of the people who actually are using social media platforms are struggling journalists and even struggling informal stringers. So, you know, they're already suffering and struggling to just make ends meet, and even to have money for data, for all sorts of things, for doing their work. So to be taxed on top of that for using social media platforms, it's going to be difficult. And that might be one way of actually silencing those all important voices on social media. I don't know. What do you think?
I actually think that one, we have to fight harder with the Googles and Facebooks of the world, because what's happening here is that, for example, my YouTube channel is monetized, but if you see it's content that I'm creating, but if you see what percentage of that I'm getting, it's very minuscule. So and YouTube decides what can be monetized and what can't. So for example, some of the biggest stories of our time, whether it's COVID or this rape and murder case that I'm currently reporting on, YouTube just decides in its wisdom algorithmically that this cannot be monetized because the advertisers would not like it. So even that agency is not left with me. So I think even before we talk of taxation, we should be having these arguments with these platforms, these social media giants. And secondly, I do believe that I think that so far we have remained uncontrolled by government intervention, because digital is this kind of beast of its own. My sense is that across the world, you are going to see governments stepping in to regulate digital media. And I think the next battle is going to come on that, Violet. How is that going for you? Do you see yourself going back to Zimbabwe?
You know, the first time I spent 2 decades unable to go to Zimbabwe, and then the first time I went was in 2018, in January 2018. Spent a year there, and I left in December when I was threatened with deportation, December 2018. I had wanted to return in 2019, but again, because of certain events, I was tipped off that they wanted to arrest me. So I've not been able to go back to Zimbabwe. So what I've had to do again is regroup and try to figure out another way of continuing with the work. So as I said earlier on, I've started these moderating town hall style debates in partnership with some NGOs. But what I've now decided, because they become too long and too stressful, I decided that, it's time that I actually started doing these things on my own, and I can do it. And so I'm in the process of building a platform, and sort of like I want to restart my hot seat program, which is similar to the hard talk style of interviewing. So I'm working on developing my website, and then I'm going to be doing exactly what you're doing, taking on YouTube, and obviously live streaming on Facebook and Twitter, and being able to continue with this work, and not just covering Zimbabwe, but I want to try and see if I can also, do comparisons with what's happening in other parts of the continent,
Sure.
whether it's corruption, elections, etc. So that's my next move.
Okay, so I think we're almost out of time. So I'll just take a last thought from you and then maybe wrap this up, Violet. What would you say to everybody who's tuned in? What's the most important thing that they need to understand about our lives that maybe they don't get?
That's an interesting question, because I would also like to know that for myself, because I keep searching for an answer, keep searching for that light at the end of the tunnel. But I guess, despite all the challenges that we face, we remain emboldened and energized to continue doing the work that we love, and also covering the issues that we care about, and hopefully empowering the masses on the ground, and giving a voice to the voiceless. And how about you? Final thoughts?
Well, I think my final thoughts would be similar. I think we came into this profession to not make people comfortable, or not reiterate or reconfirm what they already think, but to push them to think harder, to push ourselves to think harder, to challenge our own assumptions. And I think if we're just going to remain in our echo chambers and have all our work done in our echo chambers, and we're not really doing journalism, I also think that it's very tempting to play to the gallery and take the opinion that you think will get you the kudos. And I think it's much tougher to remain independent. So when you hear the word independent journalist, most likely you're looking at people who felt that the status quoist media was too oppressive, was not doing truth telling, had lost its eye off the ball that journalism represented. And that's why people like us have left newsrooms. And if you do not, it's said about governments that we get the governments we deserve. I think that's as true for news media. We get the media we deserve. So if you believe in an alternative media, if you believe, if you do like the work of anybody, it doesn't have to be Violet or me. If there's another third person who's an independent journalist, do support her. And do remember that women are fighting this battle 10 times harder, with many more obstacles than men are. The scrutiny, the labeling, the sexualized trolling, the threat to security. There is no comparison between how hard women have to fight compared to men in the same situation. So all I would say in the end is, if you like our work, support us. And good luck to you, Violet. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in.
Good luck to you too, Baka. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And thank you, IPI, for having
us. Yes, thank you, IPI and Jackie.
Thank you, both of you, for, we really covered a lot of ground, from the way you are both innovating to tell the stories that are important to you, but I think also the conversation about how do you pay for it? How do you kind of generate an income? And I think we need a lot more experimentation in that space. But really, the work both of you are doing is incredible, and all power to both of you.
Thank you.
So thank you so much, Violet.
Thank you for having us.
And Baka.